This is a heat map of activity on Twitter for a news story that's gone global. This particular story has been trending in a big way in the U.S., but there's plenty of interest and output all around the world. How did Ferguson, Missouri, population 21,000, become a global dateline? The killing of a black teenager, Michael Brown, on August 9th by a white policeman triggered protests and showdowns with a police force that seemed particularly well-armed, remarkably well-equipped. The sight of small-town police looking like an army has Americans wondering why it is that their local cops need armored military vehicles. Then there was the way that the police conducted themselves, arresting peaceful protesters, politicians among them, imposing curfews, handcuffing journalists, and tear-gassing news crews in a security response that resembled something out of a war zone. In the age of social media, datelines quickly become hashtags, and any stories that journalists struggled to file from Ferguson just went out on Twitter, Instagram, and other social media tools that became news platforms. This story is about more than what is happening in one small town in the Mississippi Valley in the heat of the night that has tempers and Twitter boiling over. It goes right to the core of racial conflict and social divisions in America and the way that those issues are reported. Our starting point this week is Ferguson, Missouri.
It's no longer a 24-hour news cycle, it's a 24-second news cycle.
A technological eyewitness to history.
From the moment the first couple of tweets hit, and once you've reached that first 25,000, which quickly turns into 4 million or whatever, the next thing you know, those people are all spreading it to their networks. You don't need a mainstream platform to access a significant chunk of the population. It's word of mouth writ large.
Or tweeted large. To understand what drove the coverage of the Ferguson story during its early stages, it helps to understand this. According to data from the Washington-based Pew Research Project, 40% of African Americans use Twitter, compared to just 28% of whites in the same age group.
This story really became a flashpoint for so many issues that people are seeing in their communities because of social media. And because there were some instant visuals of Michael Brown's body and of folks taking to social media to sort of amplify what was happening in terms of people's outrage.
And then the outlets that tend to respond to social media picked it up. Gawker, Jezebel, Ebony, Daily Dot, Huffington Post, and that kind of thing. All of these places started to run articles about it. The next thing you know, here comes MSNBC and CNN.
All right, good evening from Ferguson, Missouri.
Because it's a story that's breaking and they can no longer ignore it.
Once that unrest escalated to the point where we started to see almost a militarization of the police response in that area, it became an international story. And I think clearly, that's when we started to see a bigger media presence.
Once mainstream news coverage started working in tandem with social media and the coverage moved beyond the flashpoints, the rest of America started to get the context behind the social unrest. Ferguson's population, 65% black. Its police, more than 90% white. They saw a militarized police force, one of many in the U.S. to inherit second-hand equipment from the Pentagon, and officers dressed like Rambos, treating citizens like enemies from a foreign land. In short, they saw on the streets of Ferguson the kind of social inequality that black Americans routinely complain of, but seldom see explored in a comprehensive way in the mainstream media. Social media started out by driving the news coverage, and that coverage expanded to include conventional news outlets, then had an effect on policy and the way that policy was communicated.
These are small-town cops. They're not used to having this kind of media storm surround them, and it shows in their response to journalists and the way they've treated the media throughout these protests.
Here in St. Louis, the normal reaction to a story like this from the prosecuting attorney's office is to stonewall. It's not to provide answers. It's to delay, as they have delayed in this case. But what has happened in response to that has been they have been exposed for that, and they are being forced into doing things that are normally not in the regular way of doing business.
The rules of the game are changing because of social media. We used to have to wait for mainstream media media to validate an idea. We waited for the press conference, or we waited for the big event where the leader would tell us sort of what the next step was. Because of social media, we're really in the age of participation.
We have pictures that are being taken by young people that are exposing the world to the indignities that they have to suffer when they are attempting to do something as simple as protest. It's kind of like the Arab Spring, only I guess it's the Ferguson summer.
Having lost control of the narrative, the police then managed to antagonize many of the journalists providing it.
About 45 seconds, let's go.
A SWAT team raided a McDonald's and arrested reporters from the Washington Post and the Huffington Post. And the police took aim at an Al Jazeera live crew.
And we set up our live location, but then we saw what looked like one of these armored police vehicles pull up. You can hear the producer, Marla Jahowski, and myself.
Hey, we got press over here!
They shot a rubber bullet in our direction. We yelled again, and then less than a minute later, they shot tear gas canisters at us. So we couldn't think anything other than that they were clearly targeting us.
After the arrest of the Washington Post's Wes Lowery and the Huffington Post Ryan Riley, social media data from a number of sources, including Twitter itself, shows that mentions of the town peaked right after their arrest. What really made this a front-page story, a story that was on cable news 24/7, was those arrests.
The media got down there and they were expecting freedom of the press. And then they found out that Ferguson PD doesn't care about freedom of the press. And so I've never seen so many journalists arrested, tear gassed, threatened. We saw Don Lemon live on air.
Standing here all day, let's go.
A cop walk in front of the camera and start trying to shove him and other people. So what's happening is that the press are having to ask themselves, if this is how the police are acting while we're here, if this is how they're treating us and we're holding cameras, this is going out live, what happens when the cameras aren't here?
The police made enemies of many in the media, which had Fox News taking aim at its competitors at less conservative networks for taking sides on the Ferguson story.
All the agitators want the exposure. They see the bright lights, they see the correspondents, some of whom are making a name for themselves or openly siding with the protesters. And Lauren, it's become a nightly reality show for TV.
Well, I'm not standing by. We're marching
The protesters did welcome the mainstream media to Ferguson. They also took issue with some of the coverage they saw and some that they foresaw. 3 days into the story, a hashtag was born. A young black man wondering on Twitter if he was ever shot and killed by a policeman, which image the news media would pull from his Facebook page, publish, and sear into the American consciousness. It struck a chord on what African Americans call Black Twitter.
Is such an extraordinary hashtag. It's heartbreaking in the sense that people of color have to understand this as if they kill me, that they're going to try to portray me in another way. And I think that is so powerful because it forces the media to reconsider perhaps some of the choices that they're making when they tell the story about another African American shot down.
Make no mistake, there are Fergusons all around this country. America, in fact, is Ferguson. And every single day, we hear the stories of these things that happen to black and brown people in their communities. But more and more and more, because we're able to quickly get these images and we're able to bypass sort of the corporate filters that exist in mainstream media and get these stories out there, we're going to see more and more of these stories out there.
Our Global Village voices now on the coverage of the story in Missouri.
It seems like they're actually targeting journalists. So on Sunday night, my photographer was hit with a beanbag in the clavicle, like right here, while he was changing lenses. They could have really seriously injured him. They then followed up with a smoke grenade fired right at him, and he was alone behind police lines. I think the authorities deep down know that what they're doing is wrong and against what most Americans believe in.
The sweep of coverage of Ferguson was intense, emotional, confusing, and all over the place. Just like the events themselves. Who would have thought? Of course, Archie and Press TV seemed to relish the opportunity to wag a finger at the United States for the naughty way they treat their Negroes. But throughout a lot of the U.S. coverage, there seemed to be an attempt to calm things down, an attempt to behave as responsible corporate and media citizens.